morning. My name is Davina. I am the new library media specialist for the State Office of Education. So I hope you're as excited as I am that we actually have somebody at the state level that's been a librarian. I was a classroom teacher, and then I was a school librarian, and then a district librarian, and then now here at the state. So I'm really excited that there's somebody that can support what you're doing and answer questions for you and collaborate with you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not the best microphone person, but sometimes I'm not the loudest person either. So anyway, so Brandon mentioned I'm going to answer a lot of questions, but before we go through like the new laws surrounding school libraries, I really want to focus on selecting books for our libraries that are in compliance with the law, but that are really thinking about our students' needs. So I sent a survey out that so many of you responded to, so I really appreciate that. I just wanted you to see what your answers were. So a lot of you are looking for like collection development and selecting books, and that's going to tie right in with what I'm going to talk today about that kind of pertains with HB 374, our new library law that we have this year. And then basic books of acquisition and weeding, responding to concerns about library materials from patrons. And I'm going to kind of cover those top three, and then maybe another time we'll come back to the other one. I'm echoing a lot. Hopefully that will go away. All right. And we're going to like be interacting a little bit. We're not going to, I don't want to have you sit there and just listen to me drone on for the next hour and a half. So, all right, well, first of all, I am an educator. I was a classroom teacher, like I mentioned, a school librarian, a tech coach, a district librarian. And besides being an educator, I am a woman, I'm a wife, I'm a mother to a teenager, I'm a dog mom, I'm a friend, sister, auntie, daughter, reader, learner, exerciser, outdoor enthusiast, camper, world wanderer, culture seeker, sun lover, sunset seeker, foodie, and more. That's me. Now, I want you to think about who you are. What are some of the qualities and characteristics that describe you? I'm going to give you 2 minutes. You can jot them down on a piece of paper, on your phone, in your head. I just want you to think for a minute about what makes you, you.
Use this one.
With this one? There we go. I'm not going to start over. I'll just give you like 20 more seconds. I see a few people still writing. Okay. And I forgot to mention that I have the link to my slides right here for your reference in the future, and then also you can scan it with your phone too if you want. All right, so you had a minute to think about who you are, and what characteristics, qualities make up you. And now I want you to think about your students. And I'm going to have you, with a device, a phone will work, scan this QR code, and I want you to think about your students. Who are your students? What characteristics do they have? What makes them them? They're coming into your library, they're checking out books. they're interacting with you, they're asking you questions. What makes your students better? There's a couple different blanks on there. Just fill as many. You can do 3 and then do 3 more if you want, as many as you want. As many characteristics as you can think of. Yep, sorry. I was looking for phones up and I went too fast. Get it? Hold this out so we can see. Our students are curious, they're happy, they're seeking answers, they're determined, creative, engaged, enthusiastic, struggling, passionate, talkative, old souls, stubborn. I have one of those. Okay, great. So what we're going to do today is we're going to think about our students and how our libraries can make them feel seen and heard and belonging, a sense of belonging, and also how our libraries can give them an outside perspective to the outside world. And when we do those things, research tells us that where we promote engagement and we encourage literacy and all of that comes with that. And so that's the first part we're going to do. The second part we're going to talk about is identifying specific strategies that you as librarians can do when you're selecting books to make sure that your students feel seen and heard, and that they also have a global perspective of the world outside around them. And then what we're hoping is that when we leave here today, and you're probably already doing so many of these things, but you're thinking purposefully and intentionally about what books you're selecting for your libraries that help students feel connected and further their learning and their literacy and help them feel engaged with what they're doing in school. All right, so what are diverse texts? So we want to make sure in our libraries that we're selecting books that are diverse. And that can be a really hot topic word in today's world right now. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples to start with, which are maybe what we're kind of thinking of. So an author, we want to make sure that the authors that we're looking at have different cultures and ethnicities. So we're not always putting one type of author in our books or purchasing books that have just one type of author. And also we want to make sure our characters are different from different cultures, ethnicities, religions, etc. And that's kind of what we think about normally when we think about diverse texts, is these two things. There's a lot of different ways to add diversity to our libraries besides just these two things. With the person next to you or in a small group, can you think of some other ways we can add diversity? And I'll give you a hint. Different lexile level would be a way to add diversity to our libraries. So not always having really easy books or really hard books. We're going to have a lot of variety in the level, the lexile level. So there's one example besides culture, ethnicity, and religion. So talking with a neighbor, what are some other diverse topics that you can add into your school library when you're selecting books. Turn around to the person behind you. Okay, bringing you back. What are some of your ideas? What did you talk about? What are some other ways we add diversity to our library books? Yeah. Language, yeah, excellent. Genre. Perfect. Good job. What else? I hear some things out there. Shout them out. Language, yeah. Yeah.
Old books, new books, books that have been published a bit ago.
Right, yeah. So we look at publishing date and what the purpose of the book is, right?
Student interest.
Student interest, yeah. How many of you have like a survey where your kids can request books that they want you to purchase? Yeah, excellent. Anything else you can think of? A colleague and I brainstormed a big list we could think of, all the things we could think of. So setting, different country settings, future, past, present, different topics. That's going to tie into our student interest. Category, grade level, lexile we talked about, reading level and complexity, language you mentioned, format, so graphic novels, newspapers, journals, magazines, genre, publication date, and then there's a pretty little graph that has like all different kinds of things you might think about when you're purchasing books for your library. All right, so we kind of talked about this. Diversity is more than just a book, so we're not checking off boxes. We're wanting to make sure that the books that we're selecting help our students feel seen and included and belonging. We also want to make sure libraries historically are known for having neutral viewpoints, right? We want to make sure that we're providing all different perspectives and viewpoints because that's where we know critical thinkers come from. When kids are reading different ideas and perspectives, they develop better critical thinking skills. We want to have students have an opportunity to input their own stories, and that can be a library activity you might do. We want to see our students as libraries of information. There's a really great, I'm not going to show it here today just for time, but Jason Reynolds, I'm sure you all know who he is. Look up, our students are libraries, walking libraries. He talks about how when they can talk to another student and have empathy with each other, they become a library within themselves, and it's a really powerful message. And then we're thinking about making sure we have enough books in our schools and our buildings. SOAR is going to play a really huge part in that because it's going to be instant access for them to have access to literature. And then challenging our mindsets around how we use classroom and library materials. So always thinking about how we can guide students to think outside themselves, also see themselves, but also think outside themselves and connect with other perspectives and cultures. And this is tying back into that first part where we talked about what we normally think about diversity, which is culture, race, ethnicity, and how we're doing in the United States right now. 41% of our books are white, and only 12% have Black characters, only 9% Asian characters, Latinx. And as you're thinking about your populations, making sure that kids have all different cultures that are being represented in the school, in the library books. So I think it's a computer, actually. So they see themselves and they also have connections to cultures outside of their own. All right, I'm gonna play the whole thing because she is just amazing. I'd rather cut something else out than not have you have this whole perspective. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Grace Lynn. She's an author of middle school, middle grade, younger grade books. And she's going to talk to us about the idea of books being windows and mirrors. How many of you have heard of that before, that perspective? Okay, perfect. Well, this is going to be a treat.
I'm gonna bet that one of the first things you did today was to look out the window. Maybe you looked just to check the weather. Maybe you looked to see the sun. But what you really saw was the world. That's what a book does. A book can show you the world. But here's the thing about your window. When the light hits it just right, you don't just see the world outside. You can also see your reflection. So the window becomes a mirror. That's also what a book does. A book can show you the world, but it can also show you a reflection of yourself. But what happens if you never see anyone in a book that looks like you? When I was a child, there were two things everyone knew about me. One was that I loved books, and the other was that I was Asian. Everyone knew I was Asian because, well, look at me. My family was one of the few Asian families in our town, so that meant that except for my sisters, I was the only Asian girl in my elementary school, and I did not like that. I decided early on that I was just going to pretend that I wasn't Asian. I refused to learn Chinese, I ate McDonald's, and I curled my hair. I remember in 3rd grade, I was walking down the street, and I saw my reflection in a store window. And I said, there's a Chinese girl there. And then I thought, oh wait, that's me. I had spent so much time pretending that I wasn't Asian that I really did forget that I was. And in a lot of ways, it was really easy to forget. It seemed like there was nobody that looked like me anywhere. There was nobody that looked like me in school. There was nobody that looked like me in the movies. There was nobody that looked like me on TV or in the magazines. And most importantly, there was nobody that looked like me in the books that I loved. In fact, the only book I ever saw with an Asian person in it was this one. One day, my elementary school librarian took this book out, and she said, today we're going to read the 5 Chinese brothers. And all of my classmates turned to me and said, oh, Chinese, just like you. Have you ever been horrified by your own reflection in the mirror? Because that is how I felt every time I was reminded of my ethnicity. In 5th grade, my class decided to put on the play Return to Oz. And all the girls wanted to be Dorothy, me included. So all the girls, every day at recess, all the girls who wanted to be Dorothy would stand in a circle, and we would all sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow over and over again, practicing for the audition. Until, on the day of the audition, I turned to the girl next to me, and I said, today's the audition. Do you think they might choose me to be Dorothy? And she looked at me, and she said, but you can't be Dorothy. Dorothy's not Chinese. And when she said this, I felt so stupid. was that horrible embarrassment where you get hot and red and sticky, as if even your skin is crying tiny, boiling tears. It's that feeling when someone says to you, "Who do you think you are?" And you feel like you're nobody. I felt like I was nobody. I felt like I could never be Dorothy. I could never be anyone important like that. But I still loved books. I loved books so much that I even made books in my spare time, just for fun. Some were magical adventures, some were fairy tales, but the heroines were never, ever Asian. This love of making books stayed with me so much that as I grew older, I decided that I wanted to be a children's book author and illustrator. I went to art school, and I even studied in Rome, Italy. There in Rome, I drew and painted the landscape and the architecture and many more pictures of beautiful fairy tale princesses. But one day, I was at a cafe with an Italian, and he turned to me and said, "So you're Chinese. How do you say coffee in Chinese?" And I told him that I was American and I didn't know how to say anything in Chinese. As I explained it to him, he nodded, but he was still pretty confused. And he said, "So your parents moved from Taiwan to the United States? Why?" And it was then that I realized I did not know the answer. I realized that here I was in Rome, having a conversation in Italian, yet I could not speak one word of my parents' mother tongue. I realized that I could tell him how long it took Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. I could tell him what the mascot of Rome was. I could tell him how ancient Italians dyed their hair. But I could not tell him why my own parents immigrated to the United States of America. And for the first time, I was ashamed for the right reasons. Because here I was, trying to be an artist. And when you're trying to be an artist, what you're really doing is trying to create a vision to share with the world. But how could I create any vision to share with the world when I had never even looked at myself? It was an epiphany. After a lifetime of denying my heritage, I was suddenly starved for it. I began to look at Chinese art, and I fell in love with Chinese folk art, especially its bright colors and patterns, and I began to paint the same way. And when my books were finally published, they featured Chinese culture and Asian characters. Teachers always tell you to write what you know, but I wasn't doing that. I was writing what I wanted to know. Because my books are the books that I wish I had when I was a child. And knowing this, I really should not have been surprised when people called my novel, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, a Chinese Wizard of Oz. Because the main character, Min Li, who's on this journey to find the old man on the moon, well, Min Li, she's really an Asian Dorothy, a girl that my 5th grade self would have loved to see herself as. Where the Mountain Meets the Moon won the Newbery Honor, which is kind of like being nominated for an Oscar. And because of this, the readership exploded. Teachers put the book on their summer reading lists, whole communities read it, and you wouldn't believe how many kids sent me letters telling me how much they loved it. Schools even produced plays of it, with my Asian Dorothy becoming a coveted character. In fact, a third grade teacher told me that they ended up having 4 different Min Lees because so many kids wanted to be her. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine creating a character because you felt like an outcast, only to hear that that character was who everyone wished to be? It was amazing and surreal. And the surprises continued. Because of the book's popularity, librarians from all over the world, from Iowa to Hong Kong, invited me to speak to their students. And it was at one of these schools that a librarian took me aside, and she said, I have to tell you, this year we had a new student, an Asian girl, and I'm ashamed to say that some of the kids made fun of her. But after we read your book, all of a sudden, all the kids thought that being Asian was kind of cool. It really made them look at her in a different light. And this made me realize that as much as kids need books to be mirrors, kids also need books to be windows. Kids who only see themselves in books need to be able to see things from other viewpoints. How can we expect kids to get along with others in this world, to empathize and to share, if they never see outside of themselves? Because if they did, don't you think that the girl who stood next to me in 5th grade might have answered a little differently? Don't you think she could have said, sure, you could be Dorothy. Why not? So tonight, when you go home, please look at your child's bookshelf. Are all the books mirrors, or are they all windows? Make sure that you have both. Because if you do, you're setting a path for self-worth and empathy. And that is a brick road worth following.
I just love how she describes all of that, especially the end, the little girl, the teacher or the librarian that pulled her aside. I wanted you to just have reference of where the original quote came from. Dr. Ravine Sims in the 1990s wrote an essay about books being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And there's so much more than that. They're overcoats when you're feeling cold or lonely in the world, and they're stepping stones and they're anchors to hold you down when the world feels overwhelmed. And so right now, before we go to lunch, I want you to think about your own experience in books and literature. And think of a story that was either a mirror or that was a window, and share it with someone sitting next to you. So a book that you read that made you feel like it was a window, so reflecting back something that resonated with you, or a window into something outside, something new, and share with someone sitting next to you or you. Would anybody like to share their window book, their mirror book? What's something that hit you? Not hard. Anybody want to share? Be brave. Be brave. Thank you.
I remember reading the Newbery Award book, Up the World Slowly by Irene Hunt, and I remember I was reading it as a young teen and dealing with friends and social pressures, and anyway, I just remember that was very powerful to me. It was an important lesson, and in it, there's a story of the girl has her aunt that she's living with is a teacher, and they have a little girl that's Down syndrome that comes from a very rough home. And she describes this little girl, how nobody wanted to be her friend, and also this little girl passes away, and her teacher is the one that went and cleaned her up for the funeral, and she remembers looking at this little girl and actually realizing how beautiful her hair was, and it's just her maturing journey. Anyway, really good one, so loved that one.
And a perspective she may never have come into contact with. Yeah. Yes.
So I'll just give two titles that really Nectar in the Sea and Blessing Ultima. Those were two very powerful books that I read. So
Why? That sounds one thing.
just because I had grown up in Spring City, Utah, and when you say Spring City, Utah, I don't know if you know, population like 500 people farm. I was in Spring, a perspective of the world that I had never even been exposed to before.
Anyone else? I'll share a quick story and then it's sunshine. I was in a district a couple weeks back that had, that is mostly like the schools are mostly made up of Native American kiddos. And we were talking about this topic, similarly, a little different than today, but at one moment I thought I would maybe, when you're talking about diversity with maybe not a group of white, like most of us are white librarians here, I felt a little like maybe I misread the presentation that I was giving to this group of Native American librarians, and a lot of them were Native American too. And we stopped for a minute and we talked about diversity, and I asked them, what do you think is important to have diverse books in your library? Because I felt a little uncomfortable. And one of the librarians stood up and she said, absolutely. She said, our kids are on these reservations seeing Native Americans all day long, and that one day they're going to have to leave this reservation. And if they don't know what's outside of the world, that besides this little tiny world that they're living in, it's going to be very hard for them. And so she said she's really intentional about reading not just white books, but all different kinds of books to these kids so they have some reference and experience to the world outside the one that they're living in. That was so powerful to me and quite a learning experience for me too. So with that, we will go to lunch and then we'll come back and have a little bit more for you. I hope to chat with some of you out there. But just for time, I know you all want to get home and I don't want to go over, and I know there's some more good stuff after me. So we'll get started and hopefully everyone just wanders in here. All right, so the second half of this presentation is going to be talking about selecting books for your libraries and making sure that we're reflecting our students and their life experiences, and then also broadening their understanding of the world outside of them. And I was talking to some of you at lunch today about your concerns about HB 374 and choosing books, not wanting to be on the news, and I totally understand that. We're going to talk about selection kind of in a very abstract way when it comes to HB 374, and then we'll kind of narrow down into HB 374 at the end. So first of all, I just put this up here for a reference. This is basically what the school library standards framework that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of. And we're thinking about this, I'm not going to go into detail with it just for time's sake, but when we're thinking about the books that we're putting into our libraries, we're thinking about how we can connect them. We want our students to be thinking, growing, sharing, creating, and that's some of our focus as a school librarian. All right, so the collection process, when we're building our collections in our library, there's actually 5 different pieces that are part of that, and it's a continuous process. It really should be a cycle in what we're doing, and we're going to focus today on just this small piece right here. And I'm going to do this really quick. There's whole classes, like 10 weeks of classes on the collection process. So we're going to cover this in 20 minutes, and there's so much to learn in that. So I'm going to cover kind of the most important pieces of it. So when we're talking about selection, like what we're looking at in purchasing our books, there's a few things to keep in mind. So first of all is a needs assessment. So knowing what your students want, knowing what your teachers might need to have as a part of the library that's going to support their curriculum. And then I always encourage including of parents, because our parents are the ones who know their students the best. And so we want to make sure that we can build relationships there as we can. I know it's hard, they're not always in our libraries, but including them in that process. I've had parents come to our librarians and say, oh, my student just lost their grandparent. Do you have any books that talk about grief that can help my student process what they're feeling right now? And so parents are a part of that needs assessment. And the second part of the process is the collection analysis. I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, actually, I just didn't switch the slide. So needs assessment, we want to include teachers, students, and parents. And then we're thinking about the collection itself. So we want to take a look at our collection that we already have, and we want to make sure that we have a variety of books about and by different cultures, ethnicities, lifestyles, and we kind of talked about that in the beginning when we were talking about diversity. A variety of genres, complexity of text, topic, content that align with the learning that's happening in your building, so what your teachers are teaching, and then a variety of formats. And that's just a small piece of what we're looking at when we're looking at our collection that we have now, because a lot of you inherited your library, right? You're not the ones who put every book on those shelves, and so being familiar with what you have and identifying the gaps. I'll go back one really quick. Identifying the gaps in your collection so you can start purchasing books to help fill those gaps. And I'm not going to show this story, but you'll have access to this video. You'll have access to this video. I'm going to go fast because I don't want it to start playing, maybe. Let's see. That video talks about the idea of my own voice, own story. Have you heard of that? There's a hashtag out there about that. Basically, the idea is that we have a person telling a story that was maybe their lived experience, and then we, as the outsiders reading that story, think that that story depicts all people that way. And so we want to make sure that when we're putting books in our libraries that are addressing a certain culture or lifestyle, that we have different perspectives and voices about that same lifestyle, culture, ethnicity, and so forth, not just one person's voice. And also that the voices are part of that culture. So white authors writing about the Latino experience might not be as authentic as Latino authors writing about the Latino experience. Does that make sense? It's not like we're gonna shun a book written by a white author at all, but putting in a lot of different perspectives about the same identity. And then I thought this was really interesting. So these two books, one book is about treasuring the things that are most important to us and taking our time to care for them. And one book is about the struggle for equal rights in America. Which book do you think is which? This is a trick question, but not really. Anybody have a guess?
This cover is about the struggle for equal rights in America. Is that crazy? Did whites in America struggle for equal rights? I mean, we women might have struggled in some way, right, with voting rights and things like that, but I just found this fascinating that this was a book written about the struggle, and it's featuring 2 white kids on the cover drinking out of a drinking fountain. All right, and this is going to be the piece that's going to be most important when you're thinking about HB 374 and the concerns, the fears that you might have about purchasing books and having tough conversations with parents or other teachers about what you're putting in the library. So first of all, and I put stars right up here, is when you're purchasing books, you want to purchase books that meet the criteria in your selection policy that your district or your school created. And the Board of Education implemented a rule that required all schools in the state of Utah, all districts in the state of Utah, charters, etc., to have a policy in place that included selection criteria. This is going to be your fail-safe right here. So find your school's policy, your district's policy, and purchase your books according to that policy. And if you do that, and someone questions what you've purchased, you can fall back and say, well, I'm following, first of all, you're gonna have a very open, kind, empathetic conversation with that person or parent. We always wanna make sure we're transparent and we wanna hear the inputs of our community members. And so you'll say, let me take a look. Let me look at my policy. I always use the selection criteria when I'm purchasing books. I'm sure that I did that, but I will double check for you. And we'll go back and you'll look and just do a quick precursor to make sure that you purchased your books based on your policy, your selection criteria policy. So what are some things that are in the selection criteria? So most policies will say that it's age appropriate. So you're not putting a high school age book with teens having teen experiences in an elementary school. The rule of thumb is that the protagonist is a similar age to the students in your school. I had one person say something to me about 50 Shades of Grey, and I said we would never put that book in our libraries, any library K-12, because it's adult characters with adult themes, so we would just not do that. Quality of writing would be something that's part of a selection criteria. Visually appealing, current trends, what are kids reading, what are they requesting. 99% of the time I would purchase a book that a kid requested. Every once in a while I would say, sorry, this is an adult book, I can't purchase this book. Go with mom and dad to the library and have them help you find that book if that's something that's okay with your family. And then with nonfiction, we're looking at copyright, it's current and accurate, it's length. These are just examples of what you might find in your selection criteria. So you're going to want to go back, if you don't already have a copy of that, and have that handy. That's going to help your conversations with any prospective challenges or concerns that parents might have. Any questions about this before I move on?
So like Hunger Games, not appropriate for middle school? It's hard, right?
Well,
I'm older than middle school age, but I was
Yeah.
my 8th grader.
Are you 6th, 7th, 8th grade? I had Hunger Games in my junior high library. The law is talking about pornography specifically. So descriptive scenes of sex is what the law is talking about. Now, I will tell you, I was part of a review committee with 2 parents, 1 librarian, 1 English teacher, and an administrator, where we were reviewing a high school late age book that had a very detailed rape scene. And I hate to use the word conservative because I think that word has such negative connotations today, but the 2 parents that were in this committee were definitely very conservative values, and I say that with love and in my heart when I say that, without any negativity, because I hate I hate to use that word, but I don't know how else to describe it. So if someone can give me a better word to describe that, I will start using that. But anyway, this group of 5 read the book in its entirety and had a robust discussion about that book and voted as a committee 5 unanimous votes to keep that book on the shelves of the high school. And I would say that was one of the most learning, powerful experiences for me and probably everyone in that room, because that conversation was so open and transparent. And in fact, we came up with all these ideas. It was a memoir, this particular book was. And you know, when you're watching a TV show or a movie and there's like suicide themes and they'll have that disclaimer on the top, one of the moms said, what if we put, she's like, I'm just worried about this triggering someone, which is a valid concern, right? We want kids to have books to help them process things, but it might cause some trauma for someone who's experienced that. And so she said, what if we put a disclaimer in the front of the book that said, if you or someone you know has been a victim of sexual assault, here are resources that you can access. And that conversation just snowballed into, let's put a QR code of the school counselor to a video of her talking about how she can help you and what resources are available. And so this conversation just progressed into a beautiful, like, problem-solving thing about how we can have this book in our libraries, but also protect kids who might find harm from it, you know? And so, I guess I'm squirreling just a little bit, but I would say follow your selection criteria, be cognizant of the pornography piece. The districts are all evaluating that law in their own different way, so you are going to follow your district's policy to a T. And if your district says, if the word buttocks is in a book, we don't put it in our libraries, then you're going to follow that. And that's not necessarily what we want, but we definitely have to follow our policies 100%, yeah.
So, one of the things that, one of my responsibilities is filtering. And then I sign documents to the federal government, CIPA,
Yeah.
those types of things. One thing that I've done with our overdrive library is that if my filter is going to block a kid typing in to try to bring up on the internet certain topics and certain things, that I'm going to do the best I can to purchase books that also kind of fall under that same criteria.
Sure.
Is that I mean, am I limiting myself too much with that kind of thought?
So we definitely as librarians have to be really careful right now about self-censorship and soft censorship. And so I like to ask myself, would I have purchased this book 2 years ago? And oftentimes we're going to say yes. We can't read every single thing that we're buying. Granite just responded to me. I asked them how many books. They've had 200 complaints. This could be public knowledge next week, so I'm sharing that. They've had 200 complaints. They have 200,000 books in their library. There's no way we can read every single book. And so I can't tell you if what you're doing is right or wrong. I would just say, you're aware of this.
It's just how my mind works with SIPA and COPA when I sign those documents to government every year.
Yeah, and that's where, like, making sure that you are selecting a variety of books, and we know that there are books that are inappropriate for high school, junior high, and especially elementary school. Finding a book that might have the same learning impact, same message. 100 Games is just so different. Like, that's not a book we necessarily could find, but a memoir about sexual assault, we maybe could find another book that doesn't have it in such detail. But one of the things this mom said in the book, in the review committee to me was, why did they have to put that detail? And my response was, that's their story. And they wrote this story to help other kids going through the same things that they were going through. And so I'm not standing here advocating for you to put anything that makes you uncomfortable, but that balance of providing books for kids to help them process what they're going through, to help them be reflective of the world outside of them is going to be really important. And follow your policy. If you follow your school's policy, you're going to be okay. rely on that. Any more questions about this? I feel like now I'm talking too much and then we won't ask questions because I'm talking too much. Yes, thank you.
So we've got to be worried about our content, but we can't read every book. So what do you suggest we do with what is in the book that we are unaware of? I go to 3 different sites.
Yeah.
You know, Common Sense Media, you know, Goodreads,
Yeah.
I read all of this stuff. But you've got the pros and the cons. People liked it, people
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
People took it one way. You know.
So I would still purchase books that, and it's, one thing that's hard is our budget, right? Like, we don't have a lot of room, wiggle room sometimes to purchase everything that we want to purchase. I would still purchase something that you feel like would be a good addition to your library and let the process happen on its own. So if a parent, I'm going to show you a resource that you can use here in just a few slides. I'll show you a resource here in a minute that just talks about the conversations you can have with parents, like that first step and then the next step. And then I think in today's world, in the divisiveness that we're seeing in the 2 camps that we're reading about in the news, like we're missing out on those conversations that we can have in our school libraries with parents and educators and our students about the value of different perspectives and viewpoints. And I think that I over the years have had a number of parents like come talk to me about a book that I had in the library, and 99.9, I've never had a challenge until this year. So those conversations were, like, most parents and educators were reasonable people, and when we have those conversations in an empathetic, kind, I want to know more, I'm so glad you're here, talking to me about this, asking me about this, we're a team, so much of that can be, just like so much of those conversations can move to a better place, and then our concern for buying books kind of is diminished, if that makes sense. I believe in that so strongly, that those conversations are key. In fact, I was on a superintendent's meeting this morning, we were talking all about this, because we have to report next week to the Education Committee on compliance. And that was the heart of the conversation, was that the conversations that we have are, if we can keep having these transparent, open conversations, I'm saying those words over and over again, but I can't stress it enough, that we're going to shift mindsets around this topic. I believe that 100%, that one-on-one conversations that you're going to end up having potentially, hopefully not, hopefully you guys can just go about your business of being librarians and getting kids to read. But if you do, those conversations that you have from a soft place is going to shift the conversation. I just firmly believe that. Did that answer your question? Kind of. There's no, the part of the problem with this law, and I don't quote me on that, is just that every district is interpreting it differently. And so I have districts over here and districts over here who are doing 2 entirely different things.
And some of them are pretty vague.
And yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's like, okay, what does this even mean?
Yep. And part of, to me, that gives me a little bit of security, because nobody's in agreement. So if I do this, I've got 10 other schools that did the same thing, even though there's 10 other schools that did this. I'm gonna just keep doing what I'm doing, which is, I know I have my best intentions when it comes to students and learning, and I'm gonna just keep doing that. I'm gonna follow my policy, I'm gonna have open conversations, and hope that it falls out the way it's supposed to fall out, like in a positive way. I don't know. I'm not ready, but.
One of the problems though is that social media, people getting
Oh,
on
yeah.
and they're calling people pedophiles.
100%.
And it's such a hard place, because when you look at what happens in this room,
Yeah.
every single person in this room cares
Oh, yeah.
about students, cares about kids. And one person comes in and thinks that the person just wants to be like, I'm done with this.
Yes.
When they're doing their solid best work to
Yeah.
try to be the best.
And I felt that as I sat with these librarians at lunch today, I felt that care.
These are
and
good people.
Yeah, and we're gonna have the thickest skin we've ever had in our lives, like, as we go through this, I think. I don't know if any of you saw the board meeting last week or heard about it. It was in the news where Superintendent Dixon, somebody in a prayer in a city council meeting called schools evil. And Superintendent Dixon said that it was a dagger to her heart to hear that, because she sees the joy and the learning and the care that's happening in schools. And so, you know, tell each other what great work you're doing, lift each other up, be each other's support, because it's going to be, this isn't going away tomorrow, and I think we have a couple more years of this. And so reach out to me, and I've had numerous conversations of crying librarians in the last I've been here 3 months, and that's it, and crying librarians. And so, like, reach out to me. I will be your sounding board about how awesome you are and the work that you're doing. It makes me cry. Like, think about it. I love librarians, and I love what we do in schools. So just know that you are loved, and we appreciate the work that you do, and remind each other of that on a daily basis. So, yeah.
I want to thank you, Davina, for what you've been doing. But I want to also add too that the group that's calling us boomers, and we know what group we're talking about, it is a very, well, it is getting bigger, but it's essentially a very small minority conservative group, but they're a very vocal and organized group. You know, they have a PAC now, a PAC, but they still are very small when you compare, but it's the majority, and they're not vocal, but we're seeing more of that. I see that in social media. I see more teachers and parents sticking up for librarians. So like Davina said, we need to be more vocal, show the good things that we're doing. Any chance that you can share the good things that are happening in your library, that you can get your districts to show something that good that is happening, we need to offset this by showing what good things that you're doing, because librarians are not the type to brag about themselves, right? You need to show the good things. You need to tweet. You should all be tweeting right now and sharing on your Facebook page. Look what we're doing today. We're learning. We're learning how to be better librarians. We're learning how to make order diverse books. You need to be sharing that on your social media and showing the public what the good things that you're doing, and try and offset some of those negative comments that we're seeing. Because we can beat this.
That's a good reminder that it's a few voices.
Yeah.
And that's why I say those conversations individually with your parents. Like, most of us are reasonable people that want to talk about this. And we all have the same goal, which is to educate and love our kids. Okay, so I've just compiled some resources for you. And you've asked about reviews, like some of you have said, like, I go to 3 different review sites and it looks like it's a great book, and I think you trust that. And if it happens to be that you get a book that maybe isn't appropriate for your school, then you'll deselect it, or it'll go through a review. And I know that sounds scary, but it's really an amazing thing to experience. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier, a lot of selection policies, criteria will talk about like which sites which review or awards that they recognize. So I always use Granite because that's where I was for so long. But Granite says that if a book is a Newbery Honor Award, there's like 4 different awards that ALA gives out. A Beehive book, there's a Beehive book being challenged right now, just so you all know. But our policy states that those 4 or 5 award sites, if they're on there, they're automatically approved to be selected for our library. So review your policy and see which review sites or awards are recommended, and use those to help you make your decisions. And then evaluating a book. Oh, where's the rest of the slide? So reviews, talk to someone who's read it. There's a lot of Goodreads lists out there that talk about middle grade and high school level books. But again, I wouldn't just rely on one source. I would, triangulate. We say that in information literacy, triangulate how we're selecting our books. And then publishers, web resources. Do you guys use Follett for your cataloging or Which,
So there's kind of a combination.
There's a combo.
Sauthoff, one district writes their own,
okay,
and then there's Alexandria and.
okay. Does Alexandria give reviews on books and things like that? Do you guys know? I'm not
I
familiar with
don't
that.
think Alexandria does.
Okay.
So the book vendors, Permaban and Fall Every Order, we've talked to the vendors.
Yeah.
And they are getting much better at putting some of those mature content
Yeah,
tags on
yeah.
there.
I mean, are any of you familiar with Ellen Hopkins, the author? Ellen Hopkins? So she's written a ton of high school age books that are tough topics like drug abuse, sexual assault, whatever. Moving on. But she wrote one adult book in her life, and so librarians, that book is an adult book. It's very adult, very mature content, and librarians, because they knew Ellen Hopkins is like a great teen author, picked up that book and put it in their libraries. Without reading it, she wrote 10 other great books. We're gonna add this book, and it was totally adult content. Most of the librarians had not, or most of those schools that had that book had never even checked it out. So no kids were even having access to it really, but still an innocent mistake by a librarian because they know the author and they added her one adult book into their list of purchases. Book fairs, public libraries, some of you mentioned Common Sense Media. Amazon has a little tag at the bottom that tells what age level they recommend, at least most of them do, some of them don't. Yeah.
So I have found lately, like if it doesn't have that, because I buy a lot of books off of Amazon, that I will put in the title of the book and then I will put in age rating.
I love it.
And it will show up
Yeah.
whether, or usually not for all books, but a lot of books it will show up, okay, this is designated for this and this.
Yeah.
And if it's too mature, or, I mean, I follow lots of different Instagram
Yeah.
accounts, and some of them will rate for steaming us, you know. So then I really, because I have a lot of students who really like some rom-coms.
Yeah.
But I've got to be really careful because Love Hypothesis, I can't say the word, had awesome reviews.
Yeah.
Except it's got a nasty little chapter in it.
Yeah.
That comes out of nowhere, and that's what a lot of them are saying. That is one book I cannot have in there.
Yeah.
And I had a student who did a book interview on it. The teacher came down, you know, she loved this book, you ought to get it. So I did. And then I was talking to some other students who were in there, and they're like, well, that's got a bad chapter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I hadn't put it out on my shelf yet or anything, I hadn't processed it. And so I went back, and that teacher actually took the book, and she's like, ah, you know,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Are you
But,
junior high or high school?
I'm high school.
You're high school.
so then when I did actually look up that in the age rating, it mentioned that. And about how, you know, it did have some adult content.
Right. Yeah.
So, I don't know, I found that was super easy, like for fast, is look up just type in age rating.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're bringing up a good point because some districts are, when they're evaluating their books for a violation of HB 374, are requiring the committees to read the book in its entirety. And we know that changes perspective when we have a book with one chapter that has some sexual content that might be legitimately teen related. If it's not teen related, then we have a problem. But when districts, that is the best practice recommendation, is that when you evaluate a book, that the committee reads it as a whole. But our law is not clear, it's very ambiguous about what that expectation is, and so some districts are just, there's an excerpt, it doesn't even matter if it's one sentence and they're pulling it out of the library. I would encourage you, if you have the support of your leadership, to encourage them to read the book in its entirety, because it definitely changes the view of reading that book, like the example I gave earlier. There's something else I wanted to say about that, but now I lost my train of thought. Okay, any other questions about this slide? We kind of like, I'm gonna skip that for time. I just wanted you to know about these resources from the University of Utah and the State Library. You can actually check out book texts that are age appropriate, you know they're good books, that teachers can use to teach certain topics in school, like friendship, or so they have a whole bunch of books about friendship, and it's a book set, a text set. So I just wanted to give that to you as a resource. And then finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, although we've covered a little bit and a lot of it already, but, so the law in a nutshell, basically prohibiting sensitive instructional materials in public schools. I have an extra sensitive material in there, I guess I wanted to say it another time. Which means that an instructional material that is pornographic or indecent material as defined by that section. And in that section 76, there's 3 more definitions. And actually, I think I can click on it so you guys can see that. So right here, I, and III, those 3 codes there, this is what I was talking about where some districts are using this code
Is
all by
that the link
itself.
on the bottom of that slide?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, some districts are saying, this code right here says any depiction, word, whatever, so they're saying if it says buttocks, we're pulling it, because this is just definition of pornography. And one thing that you're probably gonna wanna know about, this is gonna end up in court, I anticipate, but the Supreme Court on several occasions has grappled with indecent or what's considered obscene to minors in public libraries, and there's definitely a wide leeway with what we can put in school libraries as far as what people consider obscene. The definition of obscene is very difficult to prove in a book, and so the Attorney General's memo says, in a nutshell, that this code there, if you are using only that code to determine sensitive materials, then you may be putting yourself potential lawsuit. That's all that they say. He doesn't like go into more detail about that, but he also says that if you pull a book for that code, that 1227 code, then you are also following the law. So it's a conundrum. It's ambiguous, which is why it's going to end up in court, because every district in the state is doing something a little bit different. And one thing I also want to point out is that the law also states that parents need to be a part of the committee, the discussion in determining if a book is sensitive material. So we have districts that have pulled books without doing a committee. They saw the excerpt that said buttocks. I'm just using that as a very silly example, and so they pulled the book. And they didn't include parents in determining that. It's technically a violation of the law. And so it'll be interesting to see how we shift things. I know they're gonna be editing the law for the next legislative session, and maybe they're gonna tighten that up, I don't know.
But if the district did that before enacting the policy like 6 months ago.
6 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, then, yeah, it's before the law.
Before the law.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
then,
I have one that's sitting on my desk.
But there are districts that are doing it right now.
but
Yeah.
And calling it a weed.
Yeah. Or they're not even calling it weeding,
Yeah.
because they've reported. So let me go to the next slide and show you. So, and I'll go back to this one here. This form right here, so if you happen to have a parent come to you and express a concern about a book that's in your library as a violation of HB 374, then you'll go through your process with your district policy, whatever it says, and you'll decide as a committee, hopefully it's a committee, whether the book is retained, removed, or what's the third one? What was it?
Restricted.
Restricted, thank you. And so once you've gone through that process about the book, you will submit that information here on the form. The law says we have to report any books that we're removing for violation of HB 374. Or books that we've gone through the process and we kept. We have to report all of it. And so on this form, in the last 2 weeks, I've had districts report that they pulled books without doing a committee with parents. So technically a violation of the law, but there's no accountability piece in the law either that says this is what we're going to do to districts or charters who don't follow the law. And then, let me go back one slide again.
So we're not supposed to get rid of any books unless we go through some process.
Only
so
if
your
they.
new policy that has to be done, isn't it October 1st, it was,
Yeah.
the district had to have it reported to the state.
Yeah. So your charter or district should have a policy in place, and you should be following the policy that the district has lined up for any books that are being challenged only for pornography. So if a book is like, oh, this book is, the cover's torn and I'm gonna get rid of it, you don't report that. It's only a book that might be a violation of HB 374.
Every district, the huge region was passed a policy, so you just will need to ask for that policy.
What district are you
Did
in?
they create their policies?
No, I have yours. I have North Central.
So we're still fine with just weeding.
You
Like
can
I go
weed.
through and I bought some new books and they don't all fit in my little
Yes.
shelf area. I can pull old
Weed,
books
weed.
and I check, oh, this hasn't been checked out in 10 years.
Yep.
I'm fine to
Weed it.
take it and get rid of
Yes,
it.
yes. This is only if a parent comes to you and says, that book, that Hunger Games is violating HB 374 because it has pornography. Then you'll go through the process of a committee and all of that, and then you report it on the forum. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a piece I wanted to just show you last really quickly because I'm going into dear Katie's time here shortly. This is a resource that you can use, but you're going to want to adapt it to your district's policy. So the second page is a reconsideration policy. That's going to be unique to your district, LEA, charter, wherever you're at. So make sure you edit that before you use it to match your policy. But the first page is probably, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. No, that didn't work.
What website is this on?
This is on my slideshow.
Is this the,
Where was
Would you go back to where you clicked on it?
Which
Yes,
slide was it?
yes, I will. You bet.
This first slideshow is on the agenda.
Oh, perfect.
Yes, we just, we
Right on the
wanna
link.
know where the slideshow.
So it's at the very end, I think it's like 2 slides from the end.
Number 42.
Thank you, thank you. So this might be a resource that you use to help you in any conversations that you might have, and also with your administrators. So we're finding that our administrators and our teachers and our really don't always know how to handle these situations either. And so a lot of districts have taken this or something similar to it and sent it to all of the administrators in the district to help them navigate when a parent comes in with concern. And you'll see, so acknowledging parent and student rights. So we're listening thoughtfully and respectfully and then asking them what they want to have happen with the book. And then the second one, offer assistance in finding them other materials. And then the third one, describe, talk about what the purpose of the library is and how it's a neutral place to provide perspectives and viewpoints for all different perspectives and viewpoints and going on. So this can be a resource that might help guide your conversations. Practice with another friend, because it might be, you never know when this might happen. I pray you guys don't have to deal with this, but if you do, a way to be prepared so you feel more confident in those conversations. Yes?
I just have a quick question. Mine is a little bit different, but how does this apply, and maybe it doesn't apply, to having like a scholastic book fair come in, and there's something that you've got displayed on the book fair that the parent purchases or does, I mean, how does that, is that completely different, or is there anything I legally need to be?
I think technically, any book you have in your school is going to fall under HB 374. But I go back to, you can't read every single book. And so I think those conversations that if a parent happens to challenge a book that was in the book fair, then you have these conversations and then you talk through it with your administrator and come up with a plan of how it's going to be handled. I mean, I don't know.
Since I didn't purchase it.
You didn't
from the
purchase it,
library,
yeah.
But it was part of
Yeah.
the book fair.
And really, if I'm not librarian in that building, I'm gonna suggest that the parent contact Scholastic. And whoever was the person pushing, I'm gonna punt that to someone else to deal with, because I brought the book fair into the school, but I can't control every single thing that's in that book fair.
Right.
And now we're getting ridiculousness a little bit, right? And so, I think technically, legally, we're responsible for the books that are in our building, but I think I would still push back and say, talk to Scholastic about how they're choosing which books go to the book fair and which books don't. Now, I think that we'll have less issues with that because I don't know very many high schools that are doing book fairs. And so we're talking I did one in junior high, elementary, middle school. I'm betting most of those books are gonna be pretty safe as far as HB 374 goes. I hate to use that term a little bit because I have a maybe different perspective, but yeah, good question. Yes.
I was just gonna say, in our district, in response to that, our superintendent basically said we, as librarians, are responsible for what we purchase. And that if the teacher purchases something, if there's a complaint, it goes to the teacher and not through us.
Okay.
And so that for whatever's in our building, we're only responsible for what we purchase or catalog in our library.
Okay.
And that the teachers are under their own responsibility for what they have in their classrooms, and we're not held responsible for their. So that's what we talked about.
And responsibility to which degree, though, I say, because you can't read every book that you purchase. And so yeah.
So I just need clarification on this House Bill, whatever, 370, whatever it is. Those are just, it's just like a blanket statement coming from the state. So parents have a way to bring forth a complaint. Like when you click on that 76, 12, 35 right there, and it went to all of those other 76, 10, 12, 27, and all those other sections right there.
Yeah.
Those are just so that parents have a way to say, well, the state has this in their legislation and we want to oppose it?
These are only the way the state is defining pornography. This is right here.
So right on that screen, can you click any one of those?
Yep.
Like okay, then you can go and see exactly what those sections say.
And this is why right here, these descriptions right here is why districts are pulling the book out, because HB 374 refers to, maybe I need to draw a graphic. It's a good idea for me to draw a graphic to explain this. So HB 374 refers to this code, which is talking about pornography on school property, and this code refers to the three definitions of pornography as harmful to minors, or this is how pornography is described, or that last one that had the really detailed.
Right.
So it goes HB 374 refers to this, refers to these three.
But that is not, what you're saying is, even though that's in our legislation, it's passed and everything, this House bill is passed.
Yep.
We're not to pull any books off of our shelves that have that without going through the process, even if they have any of those defined things in them.
Yes. Because the law says you have to include parents.
So that's why some school districts hold a few books before.
What if it hasn't been checked out in 10 years, you can just read it?
You can. If you're reading it because it hasn't been checked out in 10 years, then so be it. If you're reading it because you're afraid it's a violation of HB 374, I would consider that censorship.
Yes.
Personally.
But that's what I mean, but that is so that parents can then say, oh, the state says this, I can challenge this book,
Exactly.
I don't want it.
Yep. And that's where the committee, I think the intent of the legislature to include parents was not what my intent would be, which is to have conversations about the books and help people understand perspectives and viewpoints. But I think that piece in there is so important to furthering this dialogue and this discussion so that we can come together and understand each other instead of being on two different sides of the camp here. And so I think that piece to me is like critical to what the mission of what we're trying to do in school libraries.
Right, and I understand that at like a younger reading level, but when you're at an upper high school level, even if it's age appropriate to them, it's going to have some of those things in there. And I mean,
And that's why it's gonna end up in a lawsuit, because eventually ACLU is already involved. I don't know when they're going to file a lawsuit, but I anticipate it at some point, because, I mean, I've had high school librarians tell me I would have to get rid of 70% of the books in my library because of 1227, because of this one right here.
Right, that's exactly what I.
Chris?
But I think what you have to understand is the history of this bill. The state did not come up and say that this is what it has to happen. It's the way that the bill was processed. And the bill came from the group that we've talked about, and Ken Ivory, who sponsored the bill, because this parent came to him and said, there's porn in schools. So it went, and they added 1227, which actually applies to public pornography, right? And so they added that piece of the code, and that's where it all comes from. The other two parts of the code have been in there for years, and so that was passed in legislation. So it's not like the state just came and said, oh, you have to do that, okay? If you watched a lot of the USBE meetings, yeah, it wasn't their favorite thing either, but it's been passed, and that's what everybody has to follow, and try and make the best of it.
Did you have a question?
So let's just say, as an elementary librarian, I'm going through my books. There's a book that I discovered that should have been probably a high school book, but somehow ended in my collection, and it has that stuff in it. Can I just pull that off, or do I have to go through that process if I discover that it's not age appropriate and all that other?
I would follow your policy, but also, like, in normal times, I would say, we did this all the time. I would pull a book from my junior high and send it to the high school. All the time I did that. I'm feeling like it's really important to like bring visibility to all of the nuances of what's happening in your library. So I wouldn't, now in today's world, I would 2 years ago, absolutely send it off. But in today's world, I think it's really important that we are not isolated making these decisions, because I think that we need everyone on the outside to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. And we're not, it's impossible for me as one individual to not have bias when I'm choosing and selecting books. And so I highly encourage you to include as many in the process of deciding that, because of the climate that we're in right now. Does that make sense? And it's a lot more work for us. I absolutely know that. I'm just looking at the end game, how can we get to where we want to get back to the way that we used to manage our libraries. And I think just being super visible about what's happening in there and talking about it and asking a lot of questions and including people in the process is going to be instrumental in shifting where we're at. I don't know.
I think we can take a stand by reading good literature.
Yeah.
Something that's uplifting, that's wholesome, that really helps them to feel like this world is not their best.
It's hard right now, right?
There's just so many.
Yeah.
With what
Thank
you were
you.
just saying, we're transparent, you don't make these decisions on your own. It's not necessarily getting that committee if there is a book challenge, but reaching out to another teacher or
Yeah,
a librarian.
it's such a fine line, because I'm sitting here saying like districts that pulled 52 books without a committee, I wouldn't have done that, but I think, I don't know, like one-offs maybe might be okay, because you're being intentional about it's not like you're going through your library and you're trying to pull all of the 20 books that you think might be in violation, which probably aren't in violation, but I think if you have one here and there that you're like, oh, this really should be junior high or high school, I'm gonna say that's okay to do, but it's when districts are doing 50 at a time, which is what's happening, that I think we need to be really concerned. Yeah.
Can we just go through the selection process with the books we already have?
Yeah. I mean, you have thousands of books in your libraries. You're not going to go back through and evaluate every book again. But, yeah. Sorry. It is going to be okay. I really believe that. And I just want to say before you ask your question, I really appreciate all your questions, because this helps me go back and give input and feedback. Like, we're reporting next week about what needs more clarification, and I've known that there needs to be more clarification because you're not the only ones having all these questions. And this group is asking me some of the most tough questions that is going to be really helpful as I give information back to the legislature. Yeah.
So my question too, and I don't know, maybe this is redundant, but, so I purchased a book, but I have not cataloged it, I haven't even put it in there. Does it have to go through this process?
No.
Okay.
No.
Good.
No, you don't have to go through the process for selection. You're going to use your criteria for selection, put it in your library, and then if a parent comes, or a patron, doesn't have to be a parent, then it applies.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate all of you so much. I hope you know how much I appreciate your questions and giving me food for thought. And like, this is new for me too. I had no idea when I signed up to do this job that this is what it was going to entail. And in fact, Superintendent Dixon asked me this morning, she said something to me this morning, and I said, I thought I was just going to be going out to schools and working with librarians and helping them and letting them know how awesome they are and not having to talk about a law. So anyway, please reach out anytime. I told one of your librarian colleagues here today, like, she was talking about genrifying. I'm like, I will come to your library and help you genrify. I will help you do whatever you need. I want to be out in schools. I want to get to know you. I want to find out how I can support you and your students and their learning. So please don't hesitate to reach out anytime. Okay, I'm done.